I think we can go and get started. We'll probably have a small crowd. It's all right. So, however you want.
I'm also one of these workshop. My name is Daniel.
Hey, Daniel.
Nice to meet you. Good morning.
Yeah. Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, we worked out together.
Yes, indeed. But no glasses that morning that you had.
No, yeah, that's right. I didn't have a glass, so I couldn't see anything. I was like, "What's on that board?" So,
What makes you do it?
either one's fine. Yeah, you can leave it open. No worries. Yeah, it's always the post-plenary ones are hard, and it's also Saturday morning, and it's also a boring topic. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. It's a boring. You want to get going? You good?
Yeah.
All right. That's my wife. She's just that's my support team. Y'all are my support team. So, all right, cool. Thanks for coming, guys. I'm John David Williamson. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. So, yeah, this will be actually just fun to be more just conversational. So, yeah. So these are my objectives. They're pretty straightforward. This is kind of board member 101 is what I always say, is just like the very basics of a nonprofit board. And so again, this can be a lot more conversational. I am not a board expert, so I'll say that. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an attorney. So if you have an attorney that's told you otherwise, then they're smarter, no listen to me. But so this is mostly just my experience with boards, and I do have a love for good board governance and for healthy boards. And so it's just my desire to see us all have healthy boards and love our boards well, or be on a board that we love well. So, all right. So yeah, who are y'all? Let's tell me who you are and why you chose to spend this hour here. That's what happens on small boards. You're all of a sudden ahead of everything. Yeah. Great. So this is being recorded. So hi, Audrey. So you say you work for you're
For-profit clinic.
And what's your role there now?
Nurse practitioner.
You're a nurse practitioner at a for-profit clinic, considering maybe if nonprofit status would give you better recruiting or just in general be a better path forward, also on other non-clinical nonprofit board. So, okay, thanks. How about y'all? Yeah, okay, so all right, so you are board members on a CCHF clinic board?
Correct.
And that's why you're at CCHF? You're at this conference because that's your connection?
Our executive director told us about it.
Yeah.
And said, you know what, they have stuff. And
Yeah.
we have leads so much.
So I'm so glad you're here. Yes, bring your board members. Record this. Yeah. Yes, okay. Okay, so this talk was written specifically for you, just so you know. So we want it to be for all of us, okay? But we want more board members here, and we want this to be something that encourages you. So I'm gonna come back to you guys a lot. I know you, but.
I'm Audrey Van Wylen, family medicine doctor in Christ Community. Honestly, I was going to Chad's talk and there's way too many people in there. So I was like, but I honestly.
No, that's honest. This is how friends, encourage each other. So. Look, this is one of these when you have a workshop here and then you look at where they place you, like time-wise, Saturday morning thing. Rick's like one of my closest friends, and I'm like, really, Rick? Really? Thanks, buddy. And then I see who else. I'm like, Susan Post. It's like all these. I'm like, come on, whatever. It's fine. I'm just kidding.
But honestly, in my heart of hearts, I don't know how honest to be right now. So.
How do you interact well with your board?
What'd you say?
How do you interact well with your board?
I don't.
I'm just saying, like, that's part of your, yeah.
So I am not currently in a role.
So a physician at a large FQHC CCHF clinic who has seen transitions at the CEO level and recognizes those are difficult and challenging and that don't always make sense to the staff members, maybe not always in agreement with that. And yeah, how do we navigate that with a board when we don't really have sway or influence there? So, or access, yeah, okay. How about y'all? Any of y'all have experience with boards?
No.
Okay. You are all going to be on boards, especially you. You're gonna be on a board somewhere. So yeah. All right. And this is my wife, Jessica. She's a family nurse practitioner. We've worked together in the past. Now she keeps our kids alive most of the time. So.
And they are.
And Bob Mason. Hello. Yeah. We're doing introductions, just kind of who's who, and so you want to tell us why you chose to come here besides Chad's talk was full?
Because I want to know how to get a board.
Okay. Do you have a board? Yeah?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So part of a nonprofit organization that assists other healthcare organizations in
Yeah.
spiritual care, et cetera. So not.
Of whole person care, spiritual.
So how do we get good board members? And
Yeah.
good. And you are the executive director of the you're of that organization, right? Okay, cool. All right. Come on in. Come on in. You come in though, you have to tell us who you are and why you're here.
My name is Doc. I'm from Chicago, University Health Center.
Oh, those guys. Okay. So you want to open a nonprofit thrift store? Awesome. Okay, great. This is fun. Thanks. All right. Well, again, we're small enough where this is like, obviously, hearing me talk is not going to be as beneficial as us, learning from each other and dialoguing. So feel free to stop at any point. Well, actually, we did this talk, and I think we got to the 1/3 mark and never made it past that because the conversation took us a certain way. So I'm happy for that. I do have kind of 3 main points. These are our objectives. Know the role of the board, stay in your lane, use your authority well, guard your mission, correct dysfunction. We'll come to more kind of concentrated ways to say that in a little bit. So my kind of history a little bit. So I'm a family physician. I'm currently a hospitalist in Charleston, South Carolina, which means I don't belong at CCHF, but I've been a part of CCHF for this y'all are my tribe. This is my place. After training, I moved to Memphis, worked in Memphis, Tennessee for about 10 years in several different roles there, then went overseas to Northern Iraq briefly, and then came back to Charleston in 2020. And since being there, we've been now in the process of trying to get another nonprofit health center going there as well. And so my experience with boards has been varied. Actually, my first experience with the board was in high school as a 17-year-old. I was on our local Red Cross board and had no idea what that meant. But it was kind of my first experience, like, what does this mean to be in this position with this organization that I cared a lot. I'd volunteered a lot for the Red Cross and loved them, and then, so that's why they asked me to have this student position on the board, and I didn't have a clue what that meant, except that I liked this organization. And so, but I've had varied experiences with boards. I currently have a board that is my boss as we try to start this new health center. So I've been in that role a little while, but most of my experience has been in other relationships with the board. I'm currently on the CCHF board as well. And I use that example a lot in this because the CCHF board is one of the most life-giving things to me personally that I've ever been a part of. It's not always been this way, but the board is very healthy and very functional. It's a little bit unique because it's not over a health center, right? It's over this community, but it presents some unique challenges in that. So you'll hear me reference the CCHF board a lot because they're awesome. I'm not awesome. The board is awesome, all right? And that's what's really cool about this. And so and as many of you know, we went through, for example, a really difficult process when Steve said he's gonna retire 2 years ago and finding a new CEO. And that was a really difficult thing for all of us. It was also, again, one of the most awesome things I've ever been a part of is a CEO search process. And so anyway, that's usually my good example of boards. But the goal here really is that you guys will, one, be encouraged to be on a board or to find your board, that you'll be encouraged to engage with board members. If you're a board member, that you'll be encouraged to love your organization and lead it well. And so, yeah, that's our goal. This is my family. This is my beautiful wife, Jessica. Yeah, that's us. We have 4 kids. This kind of sums us up in so many ways. I have coffee in my hand. We're going on a hike. My Braves fanatic, my always stylish daughter, my crazy rascal of a 8-year-old son up there, and then my very gregarious red-shirted son and our sweet dog. So anyway, this is my family. This is the all. Who said all? Thank you. This is my all slide. And it's like, you might be an idiot, but at least you got a cute family. So, all right, here are my 3 points. All right, so if you go home, this is what I want you to remember. This is it. We're gonna come back to this. This is it. This is everything. All right, so, and last year I rambled a lot and really thought a lot about, okay, what are the really salient points? Also went to Lance Luttrell, had a talk on boards that I went to yesterday. I was like, this isn't fair. Lance versus me, so I stole some of his stuff, just so you know. But a little bit different angles that we're taking things. To me, this kind of is what being on a board, or if you're an executive director or who's looking to build a board or interact on the board, you can boil a lot of it down to this. And again, this is board member 101. We're not getting a lot of, all the governance stuff and all that. But I want you to care deeply as a board member. Like, that's the first thing. Like, do you care about this organization a lot? It's actually your legal responsibility as well. We'll talk about that. set the course, don't steer the ship. So what's my role versus executive director versus staff? So this is kind of my, one of my analogies, like, okay, we set the course, we don't steer how we get there. And then, so it's about both of them, like hold high your why. Like, why do we exist? And being a constant brochure for your organization, just loving it so much, wanting to see the mission go forward in such a way that you're excited about it, that you proclaim that. So these are the 3 main points. Like, we'll come back to this. If you get this I hope will help you along the way. So, all right, number 1, again, what is a board? This is board member 101. A board is one body. We're going to talk about this word fiduciary. I love this word mainly because it just makes you sound really smart. But it also, as you try to understand it, really, I think helps know your role. But a board is a governing body that's legally responsible for directing the affairs of a corporation. Okay, we're going to focus on nonprofit boards. That's all I really know. For-profits have boards as well. So I don't know, maybe y'all do. But you know about big corporate boards, and so there are different types of boards. We're going to focus specifically on nonprofit boards. But either way, the board is the governing body that's responsible for directing the affairs of a corporation. You set direction, you ensure accountability, and you protect the mission. A board has members, but it is one body. Okay, so that's language that sounds kind of familiar, right? There are many minds, we always say, but there's only one voice of the board. You'll hear, what is a board member? You'll hear many terms. Again, just for clarification, you might be a director, or maybe you're a board member, you're a director, you're a trustee, you're a governor. These are all words that people will use for the people on a board. They all mean the same thing. You'll sometimes hear about different types of boards, like a governing board versus a founding board versus a fundraising board. Legally, there's really only one board, but sometimes, like I'm trying to start a nonprofit, and so we have kind of a founding board. So it looks different right now. I'm on that board, which we'll talk about. That's not best practice for a nonprofit to have an employee. Thankfully, we don't have any employees yet, but having someone who's going to be, in the organization on the board. That's not best practice, but in a founding board, it's very common. In fact, I've actually been kind of polling some of the particularly free and charitable clinics about their boards, and just for a lot of them, their founders are still on the board. And so how does that look? So, and I used to always say it's just not best practice, not best practice. I think that's very nuanced, and we can talk about that if that's something of interest to you. But all that to say, there are different types of boards, and sometimes in different seasons of a board's kind of maturity, it might look a little bit different. But in general, again, we're talking about a governing nonprofit board. That's our main role. So again, that language sounded kind of familiar, right? So I mean, there's so many analogies we can draw between what a governing board is and who we are as the body of Christ, right? We're one body with many members. And just as a body, though one has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. So again, that's just, I think, this kind of overarching picture we can have, that we really have one great purpose, right, as the body, to honor and exalt the head. All right. So we'll do a little bit of legal mumbo jumbo. So nonprofits, the creation of them exists from a state level typically. And so in every state, you're going to have, your code of laws is going to have some statement about what a nonprofit is. And so this is the state of South Carolina's code of law. A nonprofit corporation must have a board of directors. All corporate powers must be exercised or under the authority of, and the affairs of the corporation managed under the direction of its board. Okay, those are 2 big words. But the board of directors has authority to guide the direction of the organization. If you're a board member, you are not an advisor. You're not an advisor. You might also play an advisory role for your CEO or executive director, but as a board, you are not an advisor. The board actually has the authority and responsibility to guide and govern the organization. Who owns a nonprofit? Who is the owner of a nonprofit? All right, president, good question. Nope. Who owns a for-profit corporation, right? Maybe the shareholders, maybe they've gone public, or what, you can say this is the owner, right? It's Bill Gates or whatnot. Nonprofits aren't owned by an individual. Who? Okay. Close. It's a trick question. So not exactly the board. All right. So who said that? What do you? So the people do. So nonprofits exist for the benefit of society, right? That's how you get your status. If you apply for nonprofit status, you got to say, well, why should we, make you tax exempt, and why, and you're saying, well, because we provide a benefit to society, and so society, the community owns, or the owners of your organization. So who is the board then? You're representing the community. You're representing the owners, right? And so you don't own the board, you don't own the organization yourself, but you are the representatives of the owners, which is the community, right? I learned, part of how I learned this lesson the hard way is you try to close a nonprofit. How do you close a nonprofit? You can't just shut it down. You have to actually go to the state attorney general and say, we are no longer able to provide the service that we said we were going to provide, and so will you allow us to close down? Because again, the state owns, the community owns us, and so the state attorney general has to actually close your nonprofit down. So you're not advisors, you're not owners, but you are the representatives of the owners. Somebody said the other day too, like we are, it's probably Lance again, God's so smart. Like we're all stewards, right? None of us are owners, right? We're stewards. If we're a CEO or if we're, of your nonprofit you start, like you're not the owner there either. We're all stewards of what God's given us, right? Okay, I talked about that. I said I love this word fiduciary. So what is a fiduciary? Again, I'm not an attorney. I said this earlier, but I'm not an attorney. I'm not an attorney. But this word is really cool. So fiduciary can be an adjective or a noun. You'll hear it used lots of different ways. A fiduciary is a person or an entity or a body in this case who holds a legal or ethical relationship of trust with one or more parties. Somebody said the other day too, actually came out of this idea of, you put someone, you entrust a trustee, you entrust a child, for example, to a fiduciary, right? This is even some biblical language about how the scriptures, right, are our tutor to guide us. They're our trustee, right? So you're a trustee. You have a legal and or ethical relationship of trust. That word is huge. Interestingly, I love this. This idea of fiduciary is the highest standard of care in equity or law. So if you're an attorney, you study all this stuff, like this is one of the highest absolute standards of ethic, right? So if you're in a fiduciary responsibility, there's really nothing stronger as far as your responsibility or your duties as a fiduciary. The distinguishing and overriding duty of a fiduciary is the obligation of undivided loyalty. So this is also a burden, right? So as a board member, be careful, not as a member, but as a board, you have an incredible legal and ethical responsibility. A fiduciary has several duties. So these are legal duties that you have as a fiduciary. You have a duty to care. And so what that means is that you're going to exercise due diligence, acting with reasonable skill and care of a ordinarily prudent person. So that's what most laws will say, which I love, right? Am I an ordinarily prudent person? Right? But if you go to court, that's what is this, it's an ordinarily prudent person? I don't know. I'm from South Carolina. But this idea of duty care is, again, that you're doing your due diligence. You're trying your best, right, to do what a relatively sane, normal, prudent person would do when you're making decisions for the organization. And you're acting with reasonable skill and care. A duty of loyalty has lots of different parts, but this is probably the one that I think if we focus on gets us the furthest. Like if you understand your duty to loyalty as a fiduciary, you understand that loyalty is to the organization, right? The duty of loyalty is to the entity in which you're entrusted to care for, which is the organization in this case. Right, so that means that you always, always, always look for the best interest of the organization or whoever is under your care, rather than your own or your others or associates, right? So the best interest of this organization supersedes every other interest in our lives, right? So that's why you have duty to disclose. So why do we have disclosures of conflicts of interest, for example? That's just part of the duty of loyalty. If I have a conflict, I have to disclose that. So confidentiality. So, you should have confidentiality policies in your organization. This is where that falls under, is that, what happens at that board meeting has a certain level of confidentiality because you have to protect that organization. You have a duty of loyalty to the organization. So, and the duty of obedience just means that you're going to comply with, governing laws and documents. You're not going to go kind of outside the bounds of governing documents. So, all right, that's the word fiduciary. And again, I think kind of just get an idea of what it means to be a fiduciary, or you have a fiduciary responsibility. And it all just brings you to this, again, main point, care deeply, right? So to be a good fiduciary means you just care a lot, Like think of a foster parent, right, who takes a child into their home to, like, why do people do that? Foster parents are crazy, but why do they do that, right? They take this responsibility, this fiduciary responsibility for this child and take ownership of everything to do about this child, right? They're going to, lay their own interests aside for the interest of this child, right? It's because they care a lot. They love this child. They love this thing or person that's been given to them to be responsible for. So that's what I beg you as board members, right? What I beg more is care deeply about the organization. For CEOs, actually, my other point is, and this is, I don't hear this said often, and so maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. When you're looking for your board members, start here. Who cares a lot about this organization? Robert Record, who you just heard, which was awesome. Robert has this other rule that I love, by the way. He tells his board members, he's like, you got to love me too. And we'll get to that a little bit why, all right? But he's not joking when he tells his board members, like, you got to love me. And if you fire me, it's got to be out of love, okay? But look first for board members that care a lot about what you're doing. They may not know everything about it, okay? You may have to cast a vision for them. They may not, again, have the expertise. They don't even know about every little thing about what you're doing, but they care a lot about why you're doing it. And then hopefully care a lot about you as well. But caring deeply, I think, should be the first thing to look for in good board members. This is actually already referenced, but I had a bad experience with a board one time. Really situation where the organization and most people within the organization had a very different kind of view of who we were and why we existed and where we wanted to head than the board did. And one of the things is we kind of got into conflict resolution, trying to resolve this. It didn't go well, to be honest. But as we got into this, we realized that there were board members that had been on this board for years. And, we were a large health center with a whole bunch of clinics around town, that we had board members that never once stepped foot in a health center. Again, who we were, we existed to care for the poor and the marginalized. And we had board members who did not even know where our clinics were. Again, I don't think as a board member you have to know about every little detail about what's going on, but you ought to care enough to want to see the work, right? You ought to care enough to really sort of know the big picture of what's happening there. So care deeply. That's JD's rule number 1. So I said sometimes it's controversial because what usually happens when people are trying to build a board? What do people usually do when they're saying, let me find board members?
We need a body.
We need a body? Oh, okay. Yeah, all right. That's not what I was thinking. But yeah, we need a warm body right now. We got a seat that's empty. Yeah, okay.
You see them at fundraisers, so they want people with connections.
Fundraisers, who you're connected to. Yep, that's a big one.
Oh, your friends.
Who are your friends? Yep. So this guy might like to be on this board, or yeah. My whole board is my friends right now, which is great and terrible. Like, it really is. It's like, part of it's this, like, they have to love me. I told them that, like, you gotta love me. But, and we're in a founding stage, it's very different. But yeah, that's how we got started. And recently we had to say, we gotta find some more board members that are outside of this little, bubble. So what else do we usually, when we're looking for a board member, how else do we usually start that process? Who do you know that just will fill a seat? Who can fundraise? Who's connected? The other very common thing, I don't know if you guys have this, is you'll have a grid. You'll have a board grid of board members and skill sets and all this. All right, so it's very common. Almost every board, CCHF has one. We have a grid of all the board members, and we have these certain things we're looking for. So we have diversity targets, which is great, and we should have that. So our board has to have a certain level of diversity within the board. The CCHF board does. We have a engage with students column, like which one of our board members are engaged with students. We have a column for urban versus rural, FQHC versus free and charitable. So these are different columns we have on our big spreadsheet of every board member's on there, and you have a checkbox on which one do you fall in. And so if we see that there's no one who's working with students, we know we want to find somebody who's working with students for the board. So it's not a bad thing, all right? It's not a bad thing. But what typically happens on health center boards is that grid is, well, we need a banker, right? We need someone who has legal expertise. We need somebody with governance expertise. We need somebody with fundraising expertise, right? And so we start with these skill sets, and then we go, hey, I got a buddy who's a banker. And oh, by the way, that bank might also give us a big loan, or they're connected to this people, right? And so then you go talk to your buddy, like, yeah, I'll be on that board. I do boards. Particularly when you get really large, you get these large nonprofits. Large nonprofits have lots of sway in a community. And people, there are professional board members. And so you may have professional board members on your board right now. That's what they do. They're on boards because they bring this skill set, right? Be careful. So I'm not saying those are wrong things to have. Again, CCHF has this grid, okay? But first and foremost, before you're even going to make it to that grid, or where you fit in that grid is starting here, right? So we want people who love CCHF, like deeply, who are a part of the work. If you've never been to this conference, you're not going to be considered for the CCHF board because this conference is so much a part of who we are. So if you've never been here, like, we ain't going to call you to consider to be on the board, right? We want you to be involved, be engaged, but really care deeply first. So grids are helpful or great. If you need somebody for governance, great. Here's the other thing I say about that. It's like, if you really need legal expertise, guess what you can do? You can hire a lawyer. You can pay somebody for most of that. Finance, you can pay a good accountant if that's really a skill set you need. So anyway, care deeply. Any comments, questions, corrections? All right, what's the board's role? This is where we really get derailed. And I'm gonna try to get through it quickly to get to my third point because last year I didn't. And then we can come back to this one because I do feel like this is where a lot of questions come up. So what's the board's role? The board sets strategy, oversight, and policy. I'm gonna get to Lance's analogy again recently, but so the board sets the direction, they set the guardrails with policy, and they monitor success. But the captain drives the ship. By the way, you might know this picture. What'd you say? Yes, this is the Endurance. So the Endurance, my son back there knows. So Ernest Shackleton, this ill-fated trek to Antarctica in 1911? Anyway, so I took these pictures that Shackleton took on, this is Antarctica, this is their ship stuck in ice and eventually sunk. These crazy old pictures from the 1910s, and they digitally remastered them. They released them a year or so ago, and they're awesome. Anyway, I love the story of Ernest Shackleton and Endurance, but thank you. Bonus points. All right, so point is here, right? Captain steers the ship. So, as a board, we set strategy. We set kind of where we want to head. What's the goal? All right, we're going to ship this from here to here. Shackleton's going to, his benefactor said, well, yeah, so you're going to take an expedition to Antarctica, right? You're going to set the guardrails of that. Where can't you go? All right, you can't go here, can't go there. Right? That's what policies are for. And we want to have oversight of success. We want you to report back, like, what happened, how'd it go? But the captain drives the ship, right? So how you get there exactly, right? Who's your crew? Which path do you take exactly? What do you do when storms come up? The captain drives the ship. So a board's role is to set, again, strategy, oversight, and policy, to set the destination, but not to steer the ship. Yeah, I said that policies are guidelines. So what mechanisms do you have? So if that's your responsibility, what mechanisms do you have to do that, right? And there are just a few, really. So CEO accountability is one we talk about the most. So one way that a board can enact its duties is by holding the CEO accountable. How many employees does the board have? How many employees do y'all have? Okay, good. All right. Yeah, one. So you have one employee, right? You have one employee, and that's all, right? So one lever that you have as a board is to hold the CEO accountable. Hey, we said that we weren't going to overspend. We set a budget of this. So your budget is one of those, by the way. But we set a budget of this, and we went outside of that, and so holding them accountable to that. Or, hey, you've had huge staff turnover. I'm not going to tell you who to hire and fire, but you've had a lot of turnover, and so in your performance review, let's talk about why that's happening. Like, are you leading well, right? So CEO accountability, you can hire and fire the CEO. That's the most powerful thing that a board does, period. The most powerful thing that a board does is hire and fire the CEO. Second is that you can set or approve the budget, right? So that's another kind of oversight thing that you give every year is you can set the budget. Now, you're not setting the day-to-day spending, so the CEO may go outside of that, right? Let me tell you about Steve Noblet stories. Just kidding. Love you, Steve. Steve was notorious for saying, well, that thing we said we're going to do, we're not going to do. Instead, I'm going to spend that money over here, which is great. We thrived financially, CCHF with Steve here, still are, but yeah, you set a budget, right? So that's part of how you set the guardrails and set the destination of the organization. And then policy. And so we can talk a lot about policy, board level policy. You say, this is, here's who we care for and who we don't. We're not gonna see patients outside of the state of Indiana or whatever. And so we set board level policies. Now there are then operational policies like how we do that, right? Which the staff set, but policies are part of how we sort of set the guardrails for organization. All right, and we can come back to that at some point if we want to talk more about specifics. Or many minds, one voice. The board speaks as one voice or not at all, right? So you have many members but one voice. This is, again, where I think things get derailed often. The authority and responsibility that we talked about that you have as a board, that authority and responsibility only exist as a body, right? You don't have, I don't have that authority and responsibility. The board does as an entity. So I find this to be the most challenging in places like CCHF, right? And so, or maybe again, how big are y'all? I'm picking on y'all because you're my board members, but 10 board members, how big is your organization? Small. Okay, so this is, and most CCHF clinics we're kind of in that small category. Okay, all right. So this is the hardest thing, I think, for smaller organizations or just like CCHF that are, well, we have a small staff as well. But when I call Rick and I'm like, I got a great idea. CCHF should have this person as a plenary speaker, right? Or I have a great idea. I'm the finance chair at CCHF. It's like, hey, we should invest in this thing over here, right? And so the danger in that, Rick and I don't have this problem because Rick's gonna be like, no. But the danger in that is like, am I calling as friend of CCHF, like invested member of the community? Or am I calling as the finance chair, as a board member, right? Who am I speaking as? And so I find this particularly difficult or not difficult, but a potential pitfall, especially for small organizations where you have relationships with board members that are not just this governance thing of like the board that meets once a month or whatnot, but you actually have relationships outside of that. Or you have volunteers that are on your board, but also volunteering in your health center. Or in my case, you have the executive director who's on the board, and so this can be really challenging, right, to know, where I am, again, acting in one role as a volunteer or a concerned member of the community or a friend versus where I'm as a board member. And I find it to be helpful to just say that out loud sometimes, like even with Rick, I'll call and say, hey, this has nothing to do with the board, but I was just thinking, but to say that out loud, to just make it clear, like this isn't coming from the board, or this is maybe my opinion, but just saying that out loud that I'm acknowledging that this is just a statement of from an individual. So the other, I think, questions sometimes asked, so that's probably maybe a too easy an example when you have a good idea. The other way this comes up is sometimes when you're a board member of the community and you might have something negative to say about your CEO, right? So, and so I think a little litmus test for that is if I say this, if I do this, if I encourage this, does it undermine my CEO? Would this make my CEO look bad? This goes back to the Robert Record rule, which I think I wrote down here, my RRR, the Robert Record rule of you gotta love your CEO. You gotta build your CEO up. Even if you don't like him, sorry, you've hired him. He or she is representing your organization. Love your CEO. And so if the thing you're doing or saying or direction you're going is something that's going to undermine their authority, or maybe you have a volunteer in the health center is a good friend of yours and you see him at church and you're like, hey, how's that going? I heard that, your new executive director, that she did this thing over here. How's that going? If that conversation is going to undermine the authority that your executive director has over that employee, don't do it. So I think that kind of litmus test of, is this going to undermine or encourage my executive director is one way to kind of think about. So, all right, I stole this from Lance. I think it's a good kind of picture analogy of board over here, staff over here, that's a bow tie, and the CEO or executive director is kind of the knot between the two, right? So there are things over here in the board's realm, things over here in the staff realm, responsibilities, and the CEO is the only connection between the two of those. Now, again, this can be tricky when the executive director is maybe a part of the board, or maybe you have volunteers that are part of the board. There can be some difficult things here, and that's why that's probably not best practice or isn't best practice. You really want the CEO to be the connection between those two. And so board has one employee, you set direction, policy, and oversight here, and the CEO then is directed with leading his staff down that path to accomplish that goal, right? And if that's not working, then you can retie the knot here. You have the authority to remove the CEO and put a new person in there, but you don't have the authority to interfere with staff. So I like this picture analogy. Thanks, Lance. I'll let him give this talk next year. All right, so kind of big lesson number 2 is, again, set the course, don't steer the ship. So as a board, take serious your responsibility to set the course, right? Take ownership of that. You set the guardrails, you set the destination, or you help set the destination, right? But you don't steer the day-to-day. What else? Let's see. A couple of little random notes. I actually asked somebody else who's here who does executive placement. So she does executive search firm that does placement of CEOs all over the country. And we were talking about this. She does a lot of board governance and teaching and that kind of stuff. And she said, yeah, the two most common things that I see, as she's, again, her role is mainly like helping find new CEOs, primarily for places, health centers, educational institutions. She says sometimes those are great transitions. So Jericho Road, for example, Myron Glick, who's awesome, just said, hey, I'm ready to step back from the CEO and want to find a new CEO. So, that wasn't like a bad situation. You have a lot of those beautiful transitions. You have others where something bad happened, right? Things happen, they need a new CEO. And so she's experienced a lot of those. She said there's the two most common things that I see with that, problems with board interactions. Number one is the board not recognizing they only have one employee, right? So meddling in the affairs of operations, right? And the second one is, what was our second one? Recognize you don't have, and finance. And just kind of like letting finance just sort of, we'll get this in a little bit, but sort of just not thinking enough about finance, right? And sort of letting it drift. But this number one problem is that boards just meddle in the affairs, right? The CEO, that's the most common thing she sees is why nonprofit boards kind of fail. So, all right, questions about this? Set the course, and let's hear the ship. All right, we're gonna talk about a little more esoteric about meetings, just because I think this brings out some good points. So, and this is board member 101. So what does board meeting look like? Again, every person in the room has one vote, even though as an entity you have one voice. What I love about this is I'm on the board with Susan Post. You know Susan Post. Susan Post is like one of the most incredible people on the planet in my mind. And for whatever crazy reason, people think that my vote is worth as much as hers, right? So the reality is in a CCHF board meeting, we both have one vote, right? There are some amazing people on this board, but every single person, every single one of you sitting on that board, all 10 of you, have this, your vote has the same weight. There's not any one board member, not the chair, not the vice chair, not the finance committee chair, not the development director, none of them get 2 votes. You all get 1 vote. You all have the same equal weight in decision making there. Now, again, once that decision is made, you have one voice. And so I'll tell you one of the things I don't like to see in minutes. I don't like to see minutes that say the vote passed, or the motion passed with a vote of 6-5 or whatever. I don't like that. Most boards will document kind of, this passed unanimously. The reason I don't like it is because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it passed unanimously or 6-5. The board now in one voice says, we are doing this thing. This is the decision. This is our CEO. Our new CEO is blank. The board has decided this as one entity. Who cares what the votes are? So again, that's maybe some attorneys would say differently, but I don't like to see votes in minutes because it just doesn't matter. But your vote is very important, right? You have that weight. Decisions are made in the boardroom, not the hallway. So this is a challenge too with the organization you love, is you have you'll call another board member and be like, hey, we're talking about this thing, what do you think? And you have these kind of offline conversations. That can be a challenge. And I'm not saying you never have those, but decisions can be made that way, right? So the only time your decision-making authority exists between call to order and adjournment of that meeting. So that's why meetings is a slide here, because in that meeting is when you exist as a board to make decisions. Things that happen outside of that, again, lots of stuff happens outside of that, particularly if you're a small organization and you're engaging your board a lot, but your authority exists only as a board that's been called to order in a meeting. Now, there are ways to make decisions outside of that, and so that should be pretty clearly delineated in your bylaws. Well, if we need to make a decision outside of a board meeting, how do we do that? So most bylaws will have pretty explicit rules. Well, if there's an emergency decision that has to be made, maybe the executive committee has the authority to make that decision, and then they have 30 days to bring it to the board. There should be ultimately, even emergency decisions should come back to the full board for ratification, even if it's later. Or we have a policy in ours that says if by written unanimous consent we can make a decision. So let's say it's we need to make we had to do something recently that I forgot, but it's our next board member meeting's three months away, and I kind of mean to make this decision now. Oh, we were opening a bank account or something. It's like I really wanted my board to say this is a board decision. And it's like it wasn't a big deal, but the board needed to decide, yes, we can pursue this relationship, whatever. And so I just, by email, I was like, I need everybody to just verbally, consent in writing that you're okay with us opening this. And so every single board member we had to have unanimous written consent that this decision was being made, right? So that's a little clause in our bylaws. So the point is, your authority exists as a board, not as individuals, and so therefore decisions are primarily made within board meetings. And if not, it needs to be very explicit of how that's going to be handled. So, also, I'd say you have a voice but not a veto. Again, this goes back to every vote counts. No one on your board should have veto power. That one person who just has outweighed authority, and when they say, no, we're not doing that, and everybody's like, okay, fine. No one on the board has more authority than any other individual on the board. All right, I will say for small nonprofits, one of the things that's really helpful with that is if you do have a working board, you're very engaged and involved, is like be clear, like, hey, this meeting's adjourned, and so now let's have a working meeting now. So we do this actually on my board a lot. It's like, all right, hey, the official meeting's adjourned. Will you guys sit down and brainstorm this with me for 5 more minutes? Like we're very explicit, like now we're entering into a work meeting where I need you guys to help me with some operational stuff, right? We're not a board anymore. So I think it's helpful to just, again, say out loud, like this is a work meeting or an operational meeting that we're gonna have now and no longer a board meeting, so. All right, finance really quickly. I mentioned this because, like I said, this is the second most common place Kimberly says that organizations drift. I think this is where organizations can drift kind of quietly. This is often where mistakes happen and nobody really sees it. And it's because people are afraid. People are afraid of finance. And so I don't know about you guys. Anybody a financial person in here? Like that's your thing? All right. It's most of us, I think, get a little bit leery about entering into kind of big financial things, particularly the bigger your organization is, right? And so you have a big, $50 million health center, and it's like, I don't even know how to look at a balance sheet, Also, by the way, this is often where the CEO is judged, like it or not. You might have 15 different things that you want your CEO to do, but in the day, if your balance sheet doesn't look good, your CEO is going to be judged on that. So my encouragement to you is jump into finance. So this is something that I knew nothing about and figured out like that's a problem because none of us know nothing about finance, not on the CCHF board, but just like the people I was working with. It's like, and I kind of like this. So I just started reading. I'll give you some resources here in a minute, but like get on your finance committee. I'm not the finance chair, which is stupid, but because I care, like just because like I ask a lot of questions. So I don't know what this number means on the balance sheet of the budget. Somebody tell me. Anybody know what this means? Ask a lot of questions. I mentioned cash on hand balance sheet. I'll give you a resource in a minute. There are some, you can learn financial statements in a 15-minute read and get enough understanding of how to read financial statements to at least start digging into them. You're not gonna be an expert, but it doesn't take much to at least get a basic idea of what your financial statements look like. So. A big part of this is donors should be motivated by your why, not your what. Just again, ask questions like this big donor we got, like why did they give us $1 million, right? Just ask questions, be engaged, be concerned about finances. The board is responsible for the CEO's compensation. So one thing that you do have to do as a board is justify why you're paying your CEO what you're paying them. And so just a little side note, that is one of your responsibilities though. All right, and money is a fuel, not the mission. Maybe that should be a big blue point too. Money's the fuel, it's not the mission. So again, this is just where organizations so easily drift. It's such an, actually, we all often hear the phrase like no money, no mission, right? And it's true, but money also is irrelevant without the mission, right? Money is the fuel. So just keep that in balance. Like, yes, you need money. No money, no mission, Rob Warner. But without, make sure that your money is your fuel and not actually what you're directed towards. So, all right, my favorite author is Jim Collins, wrote a book, Good to Great, and he has a little micro book called Good to Great in the Social Sectors. He said, for social sector organizations, what we do, performance must be assessed not relative to mission, or should be assessed relative to mission, not financial return, right? What are your, if you have KPIs, if you have, UDS report that has 1 million different data points you have to report every year, like how many of those are tied back to your mission? Does your organization every year gauge yourself, ask yourself, like how are we doing missionally? Like, here's our mission statement, here's our vision and our values. Where are we this year? Very objectively, very like specifically, where are we? We should be measuring organizations not by financial success primarily, but primarily relative to, are we staying true to our mission? I think it should show up in everything you do. I think your reports should see your mission statement throughout it, your strategic plans. I think how you incentivize people and time. All right, we're just gonna, yeah. So mission, know why you exist. I think this is easier for smaller boards when you're probably there because you really care about the organization. Again, if you care deeply, this probably isn't a big deal. I think as you grow, this gets harder and harder to know, like, why do we really exist? What is what's our why here? We talk about differentiating means from mission. Yeah, we talk about duty to loyalty. So this goes back to duty to loyalty, knowing why your mission exists. All right, so again, the kind of overarching idea with this is hold high your why. Like, why does this organization exist? And am I excited about that? Like, do I really care about the direction of this organization? Do I really, really want to see it happen? Again, I think about CCHF. Like, the reason we're all here is because we care deeply about the marginalized being cared for in the name of Jesus. Like, I wake up every day thinking about it. We should all be billboards and posters and brochures for that every day. And so is that true of your organization, right? And so as a board member, as an executive director, but look for people who really want to hold high your why. Why are we doing this? You should be able to articulate that and really be excited about it. Grit and Horse wrote this book called Mission Drift, which I recommend to you. They say, when we begin to see our priority as a growing ministry instead of a faithful one, we sow the seeds of mission drift. So again, do we measure our organization based on our faithfulness, based on how clear we're staying focused to our mission, how further we're getting along that mission? Or is the number of patients we saw this year compared to last year the most important thing? Is our budget comparison year to year the most important thing? Number of people who attended the conference every year? Now, those are helpful metrics, but they should be secondary to how faithful are we being to our organization. So again, the 3 overarching points: care deeply, set the course, don't steer the ship, hold high your why. Totally out of time. These are the resources I mentioned. Everything I said and a whole lot more you can read in about 30 minutes with this first book, Board Member Orientation. I've been encouraging this for boards now. This book's very just simple, straightforward. It's kind of basics of being on a board. The second one, Little Book of Boards. Similarly, you probably don't need both of them. It's a little bit more kind of anecdotal in sort of how it tells stories, which is fun. But those 2 books, again, I think are very helpful for new board members. I didn't talk about Start With Why, if you know that book, Simon Sinek. It's great. Mission Drift, Grit and Horse. I think this is great about if you're on a board or you're the organization that's in a place, like you're not a founding board, but you're not trying to start a new board, but you really want to know how do we continue to set the course well. Mission Drift is a great book with lots of, most of them are examples of organizations that have drifted, but it helps us know how not to drift. I mentioned Redemptor Nonprofit and Practice Labs in general. They have a whole ton of great stuff on just being that thing, Redemptor Nonprofit. And then Finance Basics. So this is a little book that said you can read in 20 minutes. It's from the Harvard Business Review's 20-minute manager series. That whole series is good. But literally 20 minutes, you can read this. And I promise you, you will feel like, hey, I can pick up a P&L right now and look at it and have some idea of what it is. So Finance Basics, the Harvard Business Review 20-minute manager series is really great just to kind of get basics of those things. So I say basics. I still review that, honestly, sometimes looking at financial statements. So very helpful. All right, and that is my time. We have a few minutes for questions, right? It says 10:42. I have 3 minutes. Looking at the bosses there. All right, that was like, I don't know, what's the word I want? Flying fast. Questions, thoughts, comments? Yes. Oh, great question. That's a great question. Yeah, so there are some organizations, again, I'm in one right now, we're trying to start a nonprofit, and so I'm on the board, I'm a voting member on the board. I'm also the CEO, executive director of the organization. I'm not drawing a salary, I wouldn't have any money. And there are a lot of, again, there are several wonderful free and charitable clinics here who the CEO is on the board and is a voting member. It's generally not best practice for the CEO or any employee to be a voting member. Again, there are plenty of good exceptions to that, but generally best practice is you don't have them on the board. However, the CEO is typically an ex officio, meaning they have a seat at the board meeting because of their title, but they're usually a non-voting member of the board. And so we didn't talk about kind of how board meetings go. Executive session, a lot of, when you have a board meeting, you might have an executive session at the end, which is saying, hey, we're going to kick everybody out, including the CEO and everyone else, to only talk about things that the board needs to know. I caution people about executive sessions because sometimes they can be abused very easily where you're like, we're in this private session now. But in general, no, the CEO would not be a voting member, but would probably attend all the board meetings and be engaged and involved in that, except executive session. Is that helpful? Okay. Yes, please.
At any point, the board compensation or is it all voluntary?
Great question. So it should be kind of in your bylaws. In general, no, there can be no compensation. Like, you can't be paid to be a board member. Your cost associated with being a board member can sometimes be reimbursed. And so I don't think that's very common, honestly, in most kind of nonprofits, because most of us are trying to like shave every penny. But, so we'll have meals at our board member, for example. So we'll have meals brought in, and that's paid for by CCHF, or by the organization. We do not, CCHF does not compensate for any travel, et cetera. You could have, so board members are entitled potentially to kind of being reimbursed for expenses associated with the board, but I'd say with most small nonprofits, they typically don't. Does that make sense? Yeah. So.
About the survey, the non-out part of workshop from session 6, that is free from the. Oh, I'd like to get feedback. Put it in the chat. Put it in the chat. No, but how? If you go into the specific session.
Same with this. Yeah.
Yeah. Say, 1 to 5, how great is the session?
I tried to be obedient and put the slides in here, but okay.
No, everything.
I got you. I got you. Oh, bummer. Okay. Gotcha. And I didn't put again, I am not an expert. I just love this stuff. I love healthy boards. But if I can be encouraging or helpful at all, please email me, call me, I'll give you my.
I couldn't tell, did you post your PowerPoint?
I did not. I can post it though. Yeah, post PowerPoint. Okay, yep, I'll post the PowerPoint there. I think my email and contact should be on that talk. Okay, all right, thanks. Really? No, I am dumber every day with technology, so. Yes? Oh, yeah, that's right. So the Harvard Business Review Finance Basics for Managers is you can get the free PDF online. You don't have to buy the little booklet. Same with all the Praxis Lab stuff, redemptive nonprofit, praxislabs.org, or just go to Praxis Labs or Google Praxis Labs. But their stuff also is generally free PDF download. So, yes. Yep. Thanks. Yeah.
Do you know of any other nonprofits in your sector that are members of Evangelical Council of Financial Accountability?
ECFA.
Are you familiar with that?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I've seen several that are. Evangelical Council of Financial Accountability. Yeah, that's ECFA, right? ECFA. ECFA. Yeah. So sort of set standards for financial accountability, and you basically, if you get the stamp of ECFA, it shows that you've kind of gone through the extra. So, for example, one of those, we didn't talk about these things, but like, an audit is not required every year. But if you're an ECFA person, to get ECFA certification, it is required. So.
Just a note on that. If you are at a certain level, in terms of budget, income, donations, audit
is required, right? Yeah.
Not at that level. I think it might be $1 million. Audit is not required, but a compilation is.
Yeah. Right. But yes, ECFA is a great resource, actually, I think, even as much as a certification. So I think it's probably less likely that people, get it. I do think it sort of shows a level of financial accountability and sort of, financial concern that's helpful, but necessary. I don't think it's necessary.
In terms of
Yeah.
donors.
That's a good question as far as donors. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
Thank you.
So I found it to be a good resource though. So QR code is working now. Okay. Ooh, you fixed it. Somebody fixed it. Good.
Very happy.
Darn. No, please give me feedback. All the feedback I got last year was helpful, but now I'm like, all right, thank you all. Again, please, happy to answer emails or texts or anything. So have a great rest of your CCHF.